I think it's time to supercharge your hobby experience. We're going to take you from doing good to great with just a few basic fundamentals on dosing. And I think that every hobbyist needs to hit this point where they're at a brick wall and they're ready to go to the next level. We're going to cover all of those components today. Okay, so first on my list of notes, we're going to talk about why. Why is a huge question. Things like what's going to impact all of these parameters that I'm measuring. First, we're going to talk about salinity because that's going to be the number one. When we're talking about salinity, it doesn't matter what you're measuring it with. We're going to talk about consistency. So our goal here is going to be 1.025 specific gravity. If you're testing it with a refractometer, if you're testing it with a salinity pen, if you're testing it with a hydrometer, it's okay. Just make sure you're doing it regularly so that you know what that number looks like. Because salinity, first of all, is going to be the density of salt in the water. And that's going to have a big impact on our main focus component, which is going to be alkalinity, but also your mag and your calcium and other various items. But for all practical purposes, we're going to talk about alkalinity because that's our main focus. If your salt water right now, let's just say, is 1.023, and you say, I need to make a correction because Josh told me it needs to be 1.025. First of all, this is not a terrible number. You're still in a target range within reason. I'm not telling you that's perfect. But if you decide that you're going to bring your salinity up, and right now at 1.023, your alkalinity is at 10. So now as you bring that up, I don't know what the direct correlation is here, but I can tell you this is also going to go up. Let's just say for all practical purposes, it goes up to 11. If your goal is to focus on this number as a primary and you changed your salinity, that's another variable. You should be focusing on how to maintain this at an even number all the time. So go back to this point. If you're a new hobbyist and you just decided to get into coral, or you're struggling to figure out how to grow your corals and you don't have an ATO, get one. Let's say that you want to do things on the cheaper side. Let's say that you are stubborn and you decide that I'm not going to spend the money on an auto top off and I'm going to do it every day like I'm supposed to. That's perfectly fine. But let's do a couple of things first. First of all, hold yourself accountable. You're going to say every single day, I'm going to top off my tank. It's best if you do it multiple times in a day. Give yourself a little Sharpie mark. And we're not talking about in the tank, we're talking about in the pump chamber. So if you have a sump, there's the chamber that your pump sits in. If you have an integrated sump design like an all-in-one, there's a chamber that your pump sits in. Make a Sharpie mark on that glass so you know where the water resides at all times. Fill it back up to that line every time it evaporates below the line. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now you've got a pretty consistent baseline for all of your salinity measurements. If the water is above that, there's a good chance that you overfilled it and your salinity is going to go down. If your water level is below that line and it evaporated, there's a pretty good likelihood that the salinity is higher. Fill it back up with fresh water to the line. If you did a water change and the water level is lower, top it off with salt water because you took that water out, it didn't evaporate. But it's always a good practice to just test the salinity before you make any adjustments to the water level, because if you don't remember if you did a water change or you don't remember if it evaporated, those two things will have a factor on which water you should be using. Evaporation is always fresh water top off. Water change is always salt water top off. Okay, salinity has a big impact on your alk. We got that out of the way. Now I want to talk about phosphate levels. We're not going to talk about lighting. We're not going to talk about flow. We're We're not going to talk about nutrition. We're going to talk specifically about phosphate. This is a material that you are putting into your tank. It doesn't just fictitiously come out of everywhere. If you have high phosphate levels, you put it there. You use the dirty food. You put too much food. Something along those lines. The only exception is if you are not getting that waste out of the tank with the proper flow, we've talked about in a flow video, which I'm sure we can put here on the screen, then it's just a matter of you putting the material there. It comes by way of pelletized food in high concentration. There's a lot of reef type foods out there that have a whole bunch of stuff in it. Almost always you're gonna find high levels of phosphate in there. If fed in the right quantity, you're gonna see that it doesn't impact your phosphate so much, but it will. That being said, your phosphates are high. There's different types of medias that you can use, like GFO, things like ROAPHOS fall under that category. I think there's different aluminum oxides, whatever the case. Whatever you decide to use to remove phosphates, it's not gonna be great to do a water change because it doesn't impact it so much. So a resin, some sort of material to take it out is gonna be most appropriate. Phosphate levels will inhibit your growth pretty substantially. As a matter of fact, I think if you use on one of the instructional cards in there, it says that once your phosphate levels are over a certain point, it says growth will be retarded. This is a fact. Two things we've talked about so far there that are gonna impact your water testing results: salinity and phosphates. The next thing is, I said we weren't gonna talk about lighting, but if your tank is growing extremely slow, you're not going to be taking up a bunch of alkalinity. So lighting can play a factor in that, but I don't want to use that as a variable in today's conversation so much. That's a very minor portion of it, and I'll talk about that why later. And then the last thing is going to be how mature your tank is full of coral. If you're not that new hobbyist that's just got fish and just getting into corals, your uptake could be significantly higher if you've got big, huge leather colonies, you've got a whole bunch of Recordia, you've got a Lobo that you've had for a year that's grown from a single head to 4 or 5 heads. Whatever the corals are. If there's a ton of coral in there, they're always going to be bringing these material levels down. Alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium as a primary focus. Now that we've gotten most of those impact concepts out of the way, I want to move into what we're going to be testing, because I've already mentioned alk is going to be the primary, but I want to talk about the other elements and then some of the minor stuff too. Trace elements always come up in conversation. It's important, but I kind of want to go back to the point that I make pretty frequently, especially in video, and that is grow your corals first. Don't worry about polyp extension. Don't worry about color. Don't worry about all of these other things like getting better blues and stronger reds out of your coral. All that stuff comes after. We're talking about fundamental stuff. There's so many things that we like to tinker with as a hobbyist because there's cool videos out there, there's beautiful tanks, and you want to do that yourself. The fact of the matter is, let's start with the fundamental stuff because it's so critically important to getting off on the right foot. So what are we going to be testing? We're going to be testing these, and I'm going to list them in order of importance. Okay, so we are actually going to always monitor temp. This is a permanent. This is a non-negotiable. You always need to know that temperature is a variable, and it will always be important at a high level because it has a small threshold. You can't be in the 82, 83 and have your corals be okay. You can't be in the 65, 66 range and have your corals growing well. They may live, but they're definitely not going to be happy. So this is a non-negotiable. It'll always stay there. Temp is super important. Then it's going to be salt. This has to be maintained at a perfect level all the time in order for you to have a clear understanding of your alkalinity and your calcium and magnesium. Phosphates. So while this number is not as important in the consistency world, in terms of regular, rigorous testing, it's going to have an impact on the minerals that we're going to talk about. So I put this before alkalinity. These all have to be good at all times in order for us to hone in on what we need to dose and how frequently and how much we're going to be dosing. Alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium is our focus for dosing. These are the constants. So this is more important than these two. However, I'm going to group these together because in my mind, they're almost the same in terms of importance. Let's say you do an ICP test. We have to understand that in ICP testing, you want to use the same unit of measurement for everything. And usually it's something like milligrams per liter. Okay, sometimes it's micro instead of milligrams. However, for the focus of this discussion, I want to talk about milligrams per liter. There's conversions for all this. However, if you look at calcium and you look at magnesium, let's just throw a number out there and say, this is supposed to be 440. This is supposed to be 1400. These are two common numbers that you're going to see for calcium and magnesium. If you look at the number, it's a big number this is a big number compared to this one. Going back to the small stuff like trace, you're going to see strontium that's going to be like, I don't know, 7 milligrams per liter. You're going to see things like boron that are like 9. And look, I'm not a scientist. I don't know what these numbers are supposed to be, but for the purpose of this discussion, 7 is a whole lot smaller than 1400. So if you focus on these, there's a pretty good likelihood, like I said, don't focus on that little stuff. Grow your corals first. These are going to stay in line if you keep those numbers up within reason, because it's such a big number. And all that means is if you're using the same unit of measurement, there's 1,400 more ions available than there is down here. 1,300, sorry, for lack of better terms. That's available in the water column at 3 times the density as calcium, which means that in most scenarios, they're being taken in at that same ratio. Alk is a smaller number. We measure that in DKH, different types of hardness measurements. However, for this discussion, I just wanted to show the lesser importance on all the things like strontium, manganese, iodide, boron, stuff like that. It's important down the road because if you have something that's out of whack, there's a very good likelihood that if your regular testing is good at all times, and you know that these constants are always that constant, maybe there's something in the macro level that you should look at, but not for today. Knowing that we need to be focusing on alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium, there's a whole bunch of different implementation methods. You know, you can be using a calcium reactor, or you can be using 2-part dosing, you can be using kalkwasser. Let's talk about 2-part or 3-part for the ease of discussion, because in this case, you've got 1 part that's alk, 1 part that's calcium, and 1 part that's mag. This is the easiest, especially for somebody with a tank like that. You know, that's a 25-gallon lagoon. There's a pretty good likelihood that if you just establish a dosing regimen on a frequent basis to keep those levels all the same, and it's just a 3-part dosing system, if you figure out what those actual numbers are, that tank is going to do good. I promise you. Regular water change, making sure your temperature and salinity are always good, and dosing those 3 components. Let's talk about alkalinity. If I've got a 25-gallon tank, just like that right there, and it's got a whole bunch of corals in there. There's ganies, which is a stony. There's acans, there's chalices, there's echinatas, there's mushrooms of all different varieties. That tank is going to go through a bunch of elk. So what are we going to do? We're going to test for it. Hanna, Salifert, ICP testing, There's a bunch of different Lamont tests. There's a bunch of different varieties out there for you to test. You could use a Trident. You could use a Hydros IV and X10 setup. It doesn't matter what you have. As long as you test and you test regularly and we're focused on alkalinity, it fits this discussion. Okay, here's my sad little graph. Here, this is going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You don't have to test every single day. If you're crazy about it and you want to, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. I would at least suggest every other day when you're trying to establish what that routine looks like. If you're a busy person, stick to something that's going to work for you. Get it set up on a dosing pump instead of doing it manually. I'm not selling a product. I'm telling you it's going to help you succeed. Consistency is key here. Test every other day. If you say, I'm going to test every single day, I'm not going to miss this one. And then you go 3 days without testing. Well, set it up in the beginning, knowing full well that you're probably going to test every 2 or 3 days and you're going to miss 1 or 2. It's okay. Just plan from the beginning. If you know yourself, stick to the truth. You're probably not going to do it every single day. That being said, on this side here, we're going to say we're going for alkalinity. The lowest alk that I've ever tested was 6 DKH. 7, 8, 9, 10. I use these numbers here, 6 to 10, because these are safe ranges. I think most of us have probably been online and saw everybody says you don't want more than a DKH swing or you don't want more than 1.5 DKH swing in any short period of time. Look, if it's over a day or two, a single DKH is probably not going to kill stuff. If you've got a ton of stonies like Acropora and some of the more complicated corals to keep, maybe it's possible. But look, most everybody's got torches and hammers and frog spawns and acans and ganies and mushrooms. A single DKH change in a day is not going to kill things most of the time. Let's say today I tested 6.6 because I'm starting off. I've never dosed anything before. I use Red Sea Blue Bucket, which has a low alkalinity mix to begin with. And I know it's time for me to focus on dialing in my elk. 6.6 today. What do? 25-gallon tank. Well, where's our starting point? How much elk should I be dosing in a single shot? In a 25-gallon tank, if you use 5 mils, there's a very good chance that you're going to go 1 DKH and 5 mils. So let's start at a half mil. Or I'm sorry, let's start at 2.5 mils. That's safe. And remember, we're trying to trend something, so we're not shooting for an exact number. Tomorrow, I come and I test my elk after 2.5 mils, and it is 6.7. So what that tells us is 2.5 mils probably in a 24-hour period, maybe it went up to like 6.9. Maybe it went up to 7.0, and then by the next day it came down. It's not really likely, but it's possible. But you also have to remember too, there's margin of error here. So I use this as a reference point because I'm gonna say, anybody who's using Salifert, they've got the little dropper and they're swirling the thing and they're like, well, did it change color all the way? Well, this is a human error part. Go back to what I said about frequency of testing. It can get monotonous if you use this method and you take the median of all of your testing. Go every 2 days or 3 days. But if you don't know and you're not sure that the test that you ran was that exact number, do it 3 times, divide it by 3. Now you've got the median. You tested it and you know 6.7 is the number. Well, guess what? We went up 0.1 DKH. So that means that tomorrow, if I dose the same 2.5, that means I'm going to be at 6.8. And then the next day, I'm going to be at 6.9. So the trend is more important than the actual number. Same thing happens with the HANA testers. Look, they're digital testers. They're supposed to be super accurate, but I guarantee anybody who's had one says, well, I don't know to trust the number or not. Do a few of them, take the median between. It's good practice. It's a little bit extra work, but now you know. In most cases, I would say probably 6 out of 10 people who come to me with a scenario like this, they're gonna say, should I increase the dose? I'm gonna tell you no, because you've proven that over the next 4 days that you added 2.5 mils, which is very, very low, just to add, it went up 0.1, but it's a consistent 0.1 every single day. So that tells you that whatever uptake that you have in the tank, you're exceeding it by adding the material. And you know, we can apply the same methodology to calcium. We can apply the same methodology to magnesium. How much do you dose? Well, your short starting dose, if it increases the DKH when you test your if it increases by a single ppm on your calcium or your magnesium, you know that you're on a slow climb. I'm gonna suggest you stay on that path, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, all the way through. And then when you're on the next week, we've got 7.0, 7.1, 7.2. We're getting up into our target range, which is anywhere between 8 and like 9.5 here. We don't really want to go above that because then it's high. We don't really want to go below that because then it's low. But if you get to your next week and you realize you're at 7.5 DKH, well, guess what? You're still on a climb. Ride that single DKH climb out. And I'm going to tell you that there's a good possibility that in that climb, it starts to plateau. Why? Because you just encourage your corals to be happy, and they're probably going to start growing. So growth is that other variable. It's going to drag your alk down, and we want to see that. So let's say hypothetically right now we're on like week 6 and we're testing 8.6, we're testing 8.7, 8.8. It's probably never going to be this tight and this clean, but this is just to prove a point. Maybe on this day, Thursday, we say it is 8.8 again. And then we get to Sunday. I'm going to skip 2 days because look, it was 8.8 2 days in a row. I'm going to come back and it's 8.8 again. This is great news. You found what your consumption is. This is so important because now you can start to pay attention closer to the things that your corals are telling you. I would guarantee you that if you were down here at 6.6, some of your mushrooms or some of your acants were kind of squinchy. They didn't look the greatest. By week 6, if you're at 8.8 for 4 days in a row, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that those corals are starting to get fluffier. The polyps are sticking out more. Maybe you see a new growth tip or a polyp budding off the side of a torch. This is great information. Fast forward now we're on month 3 and you are 8.8 solid Monday all the way through Saturday, and you test. You've gone 4 days without testing. You're down to almost 1 time a week, and this is 8.0. You have to be able to expect that. So increase a single mil. Now at this point, you're saying, I've proven a track record of having a consistent alkalinity of 8.8. Now I can go from, now I've gone from 8.0 or 8.8 to 8.0. I can increase my dose up by 1 ml. And you're going to follow the same exact process all the way back here on day 1. So you're going to look for that 8.1 the next day, 8.2 the next day, 8.3 the next day, but there's a very good chance you're not going to see that, and it's going to maintain 8.0. Just a caveat to this whole thing, if you've got a 150 gallon tank, you're not going to follow the same 2.5 mils. It's probably going to be something in the vicinity of like 20 mils of an increase. It's all to scale. But if you're ever curious where your starting point is, just start low. If you don't see an impact and you're still continuing to fall, you haven't met that minimum threshold yet. I hope that's useful. I think that that's a very easy discussion in most cases, because you can do it with alk, you can do it with calcium, and you can do it with magnesium. Just remember, it's not about the number that you're testing. It's not about the single answer that you get when you run one test. It's about the consistency in your testing. It's about the graphing in your results, and it's about the small adjustments that you make, both up and down, and then also the visual cues from the tank. All of those things combined, you can pretty much master dosing in 2 months. And it doesn't, again, matter if you're using a dosing pump. It also, again, doesn't matter if you're using a calcium reactor. All of these things are going to impact your alkalinity. You just need to know the product. So I'd like to wrap this up by saying that I know that I'm not completely right about everything, but I like to find the path to success, which is why I didn't talk about a single item, and focus on that. I didn't talk about a single type of testing. I didn't even talk about a single method. You can do things daily, bi-weekly, monthly, I don't care. Whatever the case is, you're going to find a consistency to that. We can also say that no matter what your implementation method is, you can find a consistency in the usage of that implementation. One thing is true in this whole thing. You're always going to test alk as a primary. You're always going to make sure that your temperature and your salinity is a constant, but also to your husbandry methods. Water change the same time every week if you can, or as close to. Test either before your husbandry routine or after, but do it the same. If you're gonna take your water sample, take it right before or take it right after your water change within reason. Why? Because it's the same. If I'm wondering how much weight I'm losing or how much weight I'm gaining, I'm gonna weigh myself at the same time every morning. Not before a meal, not after meal, not when I get up, not when I go to sleep. Whatever the case is, it's gonna be the same time every day, because I know that there's other things that can impact my weight. It's the same when it's going to come down to dosing. Make sure you test the same time. Make sure you do your work all at the same time. Make sure that your phosphates are the same every week. Make sure that your temperature is consistent. And look, there's a bunch of different tools for these things. That's why they have controllers, and that's why they have monitoring systems. But there's a manual process in this, and that is understanding the data, understanding what variables impact it, and doing things to verify that equipment that you are using is functioning properly over a long period of time. And all this will take care of itself. You're going to have healthy corals, they're going to grow, and then guess what? Then the hobby gets fun. I really genuinely think that if you implement this concept, no matter what, you're going to be successful. And that's why I like doing these types of videos. That's why I like doing my job, because I genuinely think that I can be of help to people because they're just missing the simple basic fundamentals. I'd like to take a couple minutes and go out to the store and show you some of the product on the shelf and some of the ways that we can do things, just because maybe you don't know that these products exist, or maybe you don't know that that's how you use them. I just want to give context to some of this discussion. So I got to get out of this office for a minute. Let's go take a walk. So I wanted to come out here to the store and talk about some of these products that I mentioned. We use a lot of Salifert for testing, not because it's superior, but because it's consistent. We've used these since I've been with the company, and it's been as good as it can get, as long as you focus on the consistency part of it. If you're graphing the results and you know it's the same person testing every time, it doesn't matter if this is a color thing. And maybe you say this is 20 ppm and I say it's 25 or 30 ppm. Doesn't matter. Same person testing it. Maybe pull the median like I suggested. Salifert works really good. If you want the digital readout, you can go to Hannah. Hannah makes different products. They're either individual tests or they have something like this that's got all of them included. They're equally as good, a little bit easier to use, and for some people, if you're not good at doing the whole titration testing or the color reading, maybe you can get faster at it. Maybe it's a little bit more accurate. I don't know the science behind it, but if you like the digital readout, you like to just stick the reagent in, shake it up, and get an actual number, these work really well too. Here on this shelf, I have a whole bunch of different products that we're going to use for modifying your alkalinity, modifying your calcium and your magnesium. Again, I'm not supporting any one brand. They all work well, but there's a few differences between them. Like for example, this product is called Alpha Reef. This is alkalinity, calcium, magnesium in a single bottle. How that works, I'm not going to get into, but it works really well for a tank that's not overly stocked. So if you've got a whole bunch of corals, a ton of stonies that uptake a ton of alkalinity, it works, but you got to be careful because the mag and the calcium climb in that regard because you're going through so much alk and not as much of the other minerals. So works great for anybody who doesn't have like a full-blown acro tank that's going through a ton of alkalinity. I talked about 2-part a lot. This is an old school product that you see a lot. Bionic, it's been around for a long time. It's by ESV, alkalinity in this side, calcium in the other, and then they have a 3rd-part mag solution that I don't have on the shelf. But it's literally one of my favorites just because I've used it for so many years. But there's a little bit of trace also in these products. This is the Brightwell version. So the B is going to be your alkalinity. They tell you to use in equal parts, A and B, which is also because they use a trace in these. So Reef Code A, Reef Code B from Brightwell. Great product, easy to use, just the same. Red Sea has their own formulation, just like Brightwell does. And there's a ton of options out there, but these are major brands that you'll have accessible to you that are all easy to use, good to use. And then you've heard me talk about Kalkwasser before. Easily my favorite solution, brings your pH up, but it's also going to affect your alk specifically. And then of course there's all the trace products. I don't really want to get into much, but for the purpose of the discussion here, like I wanted to talk about testing equipment and then some of the options that you have for adjusting your alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium. I mentioned phosphate removal and using different types of resins for that. One of the crowd winners here in the store, we sell a pile of this ROA. This is great for removing phosphate, and I also have GFO. Both products are gonna be, they're similar in nature. They're both gonna focus on bringing your phosphate levels down when used in appropriate volume for the size tank that you have. Good options. You don't really have another choice when it comes to bringing your phosphate levels down other than using a media that's going to absorb it. This is also, I think this one comes in a bag. You can use it in the back chamber of an all-in-one. You would have to buy a bag for this, but I wouldn't suggest it. I suggest running this or this, preferably in some sort of a small reactor. It's going to be more applicable in most cases, and you're going to get the best efficiency out of it. Okay. I talked a little bit about automations. I think here, it's just important to know that these are luxury items. Some sort of doser is gonna save your butt when it comes to being consistent with your life. So I think personally, this is an investment that most people should look into. There's different options for dosing pumps. You know, here, these are more for continuous use, but Kimura makes a good brand. They have 4 heads, single heads, and then something that's more for continuous purpose. It's not gonna be the most applicable for something that's like a 10-gallon or a 15-gallon tank, or maybe even a 20-gallon tank. It seems like it's overkill, but the reality is if you get a bunch of coral in there and you're going through a bunch of material for dosing out calcium, magnesium, it really is a good idea. And it's gonna help you understand better what your tank is going through. Because when you make a micro adjustment of 0.1 mil or something silly like that, and you can see that it impacts that small of a tank, it's hard to do by hand. And then also too, like I said, when you get busy with life, things like this are gonna be happening in the background, and then you only have to test. And then there's automations like this. So this is a controller. Apex or Neptune Systems is going to be one of the primary brands when it comes to aquarium controllers. And then also too, we have Hydros over there on the other side, both of which are systems that you can put different products on, like a nitrate and phosphate monitor or a alkalinity and calcium and magnesium monitor. It's just to make your life easier. I mean, it's a big investment, but just remember, it does more than just test your alkalinity, or does more than just turn on and off a light switch. They're built to cover all bases when it comes to being an avid hobbyist that wants to have a full understanding of what's going on with their tank at all times and set fail safes. Not for everybody, but it's an option. And just remember, if you can monitor alkalinity as a primary, even that alone is worth its weight in gold. The Hydro system is a little bit different in a way that it's modular setup. So you don't have to buy the whole setup in one shot, and you can add components along the way. This is, you're buying the system and then you're adding the additional components along the way. So they're both good, but they're both on either ends of the spectrum. You got to do the research and make your own choice if that's something that you're looking into. So to close this out, I really wanted to do today, I wanted to do a video that was something that was going to live on for a long period of time, where people would have an opportunity to go back to this and reference some of the concept that I talked about, because to me this is an informative video, but it's something that's so important in the process of being good at reefing. I hope it was simple enough. I hope it was to the point for everybody who's looking for information and having a hard time finding things on dosing, because it seems to be a really complicated concept that I don't think is complicated. And hopefully we shed a little bit of light on it today. Make sure you come see us in Reefapalooza in California. We're going to be in Anaheim on the 30th and the 31st. We're going to be bringing a whole bunch of this new merch. If you don't want to wait and you want to check it out, it's on our site as well. We ship that internationally. If you like this type of content, don't forget, like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so that when these videos post, you get a notification and you can see my ugly face one more time. And we'll see you next time.